Was Jesus from Nazareth, or was he a Nazarene? That is the topic of today's episode. In many passages in the New Testament, Jesus was called Jesus of Nazareth, and people actually call him throughout the world and in Christendom as Jesus of Nazareth. Let's have a quick look at some scriptures. Luke 2:39 says, when Jesus and Mary had done everything that was required by the law of Moses, after he was born, and what they did was to take him to the temple for consecration. They returned to their own hometown of Nazareth. Luke 2:16 to 17 says that that Jesus went back to Nazareth after he had begun his ministry. He went back to Nazareth and he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He picked up a scroll and began to read from Isaiah. So he went back to the town of Nazareth where he was brought up. John 1:45 to 46 recalls that during the call of Nathanael and Philip by Jesus, that Philip said to Nathanael, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And Nathanael quipped, you would remember this, can anything good come from there? Can anything good come from Nazareth? You may want to also look at Mark 10:47 and Acts of the Apostles 10:38 and 22 verse 8. So, the Gospels describe him in places as Jesus of Nazareth. Was he really of Nazareth? Was he from there? Well, the first indication that Jesus was not in fact from Nazareth is the fact that the city or town of Nazareth did not exist at the time Jesus supposedly lived. Jewish Encyclopedia says, and I quote, Nazareth first appears in the New Testament as the place where Jesus passed his boyhood. The town or the city first appeared in the New Testament in connection with Jesus. It is not mentioned in the Old Testament or in Josephus, that's the famous historian of the time, or the Talmud, that is the compilation of Jewish laws and legends and traditions. So, no historical source, no Jewish source mentioned Nazareth. It did not exist. Catholic Encyclopedia confirms as follows. The town of Nazareth is not mentioned in the Old Testament, nor even in the works of Josephus. So Catholic Encyclopedia says no record of Nazareth. Encyclopedia Britannica says as follows. The etymology of the city's name is uncertain. It is not mentioned in the Old Testament or in rabbinic literature. The first reference is in the New Testament. So, Nazareth was manufactured. The Nazareth of today was not in existence. There was no Nazareth at the time of Jesus. That's according to all historical Jewish secular sources. It wasn't there. So since there was no city or town of Nazareth at the time of Jesus, so that brings the question, was Nazareth of the New Testament a city, a town, or a sect? Encyclopedia Britannica says, in the Greek text of the Bible, there appear two forms of the word, the simple form Nazarenes, meaning of Nazareth, and the peculiar form Nazarenes, before its association with the locality or town. This latter term, i.e. Nazarenes, may have referred to a Jewish sect of observants or devotees and was later transferred to the Christians. So the original representation was actually Nazarenes, meaning a sect of Judaism, observant Jewish people, devotees. However, it appears that Bible translators confused or deliberately misrepresented the sect of Nazarene or Nazarenes as city of Nazareth. To confirm the fact that the reference to Jesus originally in the Greek scripture of the Bible, in the Greek New Testament of the Bible, was to a sect, the Nazarenes or the Nazarene sect. There are many references or passages in the New Testament of the Bible which confirm the fact that Jesus belonged to a sect of Judaism called the Nazarenes or the Nazarenes in Greek. First, Jesus was called at the time of his birth in the Gospels a Nazarene. He was called a Nazarene. Matthew 2, verse 23. Matthew 2, verse 23 says that Jesus' parents took him to live in Nazareth after they returned to Egypt, in order to fulfill what was said through the prophets, and I quote, that he would be called a Nazarene. So to fulfill the prophecy in the Old Testament that he would be called a Nazarene. The problem, however, is that in the Old Testament, in Jewish scriptures, there was no such prophecy that Jesus would be called a Nazarene, and as we saw earlier, there was no city of Nazareth. So no Nazarene prophecy in the Hebrew scriptures. Second reference to Nazarene, Jesus was called a Nazarene at his supposed resurrection. Mark 16, verse 6. Mark 16, verse 6. Now, In that passage, 3 women had gone to the tomb of Jesus to apply oil and spices on the body after he died and was buried. Then an angel comes to them and tells them, "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See where they laid him." He said to them, "You are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene." Not Jesus of Nazareth. Number 3 point. Followers of Jesus and Apostle Paul we are referred to as Nazarenes. Acts of the Apostles 24, 5-6 says that when Paul visited Jerusalem, he was captured by a crowd of Jewish people, and he was brought before the governor, Governor Felix, and accused of being a troublemaker and the ringleader of the sect of Nazarenes. So Paul was brought to the governor because he was fomenting trouble, according to Jewish people, because he was part and the ringleader of the sect of believers, that sect of Jewish people, deviant, observant Jewish people who belong to a sect called Nazarenes. And Paul says to the governor, "Yes, I am a Nazarene." Acts 24, verse 14 says, and I quote, this is Paul speaking to Governor Felix, "I admit that I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the way, which they call a sect. I believe everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets." So Paul confirms, yes, I am a Nazarene. So also are the other people who are followers of Jesus. Well, the next reason to say that Jesus and his followers and the apostles, disciples, were members of the Nazarene sect of Judaism is the fact that the Quran, which was written about 1,400 years ago, so corresponding to the time the earliest Christians were still there. The Quran refers to Christians as Nasara. Nasara is the Islamic word for Nazarenes. Up to today, Islam refers to Christians as Nasara or Nazarenes. You may see Quran chapter 2 verse 62, chapter 5 verse 14, chapter 9 verse 30, and chapter 22 verse 17. So Christians generally in the Quran are called Nazarenes. Okay, so this brings us to the important question. who are the Nazarenes? Who are the Nazarenes? Well, Nazarenes were Jewish observants, a sect of Judaism who believed in the coming of a Messiah. Now, of course, all Jewish people believe that a Messiah will come. But these Nazarenes believed that the Messiah had come in the person of Jesus the Nazarene. Jesus, a member of their sect. According to Acts of the Apostles, chapter 11, verse 26, the followers of Jesus were first referred to as Christians by the people of Antioch. This meant that these people said this Jewish sect believed that Jesus was actually Messiah. They were Messianists. And they accepted Jesus as the Messiah that the Jews were looking for. Other references are by King Agrippa in Acts of the Apostles, chapter 26, verse 28, and in 1 Peter 4, verse 16. So the Nazarenes believed that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah who had come in accordance with the prophecies in Jewish scriptures. If you go back to the passage I mentioned before, John 1:45, about Philip and Nathanael, when Philip told Nathanael, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." What he was saying here basically is that Jesus the Nazarene was in fact the person, the Messiah, the prophets and Moses was writing about, or we are writing about. Now, of course, the other Jewish people did not accept that anyway, but that was the belief of the Nazarenes. So the Nazarenes were a sect of Judaism, specifically a sect within the sect of the Essenes. Okay, put it this way, they were a branch of the Essenes. In the last episode, we saw that the Essenes were a Jewish sect, just as the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the others that existed at that time. There were apparently three branches or schools of the Essenes, including the one they call the Therapeutia of Egypt. Coincidentally, Jesus, the infant Jesus, was taken to Egypt to escape Herod, probably to join the community of the Essenes in Egypt. And then we've got the Essenes, who were from the Qumran, the sect of the Qumran, which we saw in the last episode, were either the writers or the custodians of the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were in the Qumran desert. Yeah? And then we have the Nazarenes of Mount Carmel. Apparently, Jesus belonged to this particular sect. Then there were some differences in the beliefs and practices of the Essenes. Some of them abhorred marriage and childbearing, and they were celibate. Some accepted marriage and were not celibate. Apparently, the sect of Jesus allowed marriage. But like other Essenes, these Nazarenes observed strictly the Torah, or the law of Judaism or Moses, and the traditions and customs of Jewish people. They were not a different religion. Encyclopedia Britannica observes like this: the term Nazarene is also applied to a Syrian Judeo-Christian sect of the 4th century AD. The Nazarenes also maintained strict observance of Jewish laws and customs. They used a version of the gospel in Aramaic called the Gospel according to the Hebrews, or the Gospel of the Nazarenes. The Gospel of the Hebrews, or the Gospel of the Nazarenes. That gospel is not in the Christian Bible. But that was the gospel these people used. Conclusions. It is clear that the Jesus of the Gospels was in fact a Nazarene, a member of a Jewish sect called Nazarene, which is a branch of the sect of Essenes. He was not from Nazareth. He did not grow up in Nazareth because there was no Nazareth at the time of his existence, if indeed he did exist. So apparently, Bible writers misrepresented Nazarene or Nazarenes, which was a sect of Judaism, and called it a town of Nazareth because probably by the time they wrote the Gospels, there was a town of Nazareth. But that town wasn't there at the time of Jesus. These Nazarenes were a strict Jewish sect, stricter than the Pharisees, stricter than the Sadducees. They observed strictly the laws of Moses and the traditions and customs of Judaism. They were the first Christians simply because they believed that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah or Christ. They did not establish a different religion from Judaism. They rejected Paul's teaching because they said that Paul was a deviant, an apostate who deviated from Judaism and therefore was a troublemaker. Yeah? An apostate. Now, these Nazarenes, who were in fact the very first people who believed in Christ, who were eventually sidelined by the mainstream Christian church or the Pauline branch of Christianity, because Paul led a teaching which was different from what the Nazarenes and what the Essenes were teaching, which were in conformity with Jewish religion and practice. It was Paul and his followers who then said, oh no, forget Judaism, forget Jewish law, forget the Old Testament, it's all gone. So Paul then, because of the influence of the Roman emperor, so the Paul's side, the Paul's religion basically, because this current Christianity we have today is Paul's religion. It is not the religion of the followers of Jesus or of Jesus himself. We shall see more of this as we grow and we develop the teaching. So they became heretics, and Pauline teaching and religion of Christianity prevailed. But till today, there are still churches that call themselves the Church of Nazarenes, and they still exist in many places today. Well, thanks for watching. If you like the video, please like it, give us a thumbs up, subscribe. Your comments are welcome. And please share so others will learn. Thanks. Until next time.